Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Fonsa Greenborough, and in today's podcast I'll be looking at the game against Wolves by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also bringing you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Joe Ward and Sheku Kouyaté after the game. So let's begin. In an afternoon that saw Crystal Palace go 5 league games unbeaten in SE25, the Eagles saw a nearly secured victory stolen from them in the dying seconds of a close-fought game with 10-men Wolverhampton Wanderers. Wolves travelled south to face Palace on the back of a 5-2 league defeat to Chelsea, with the Eagles themselves having suffered to the tune of 4 goals against Tottenham Hotspur last Saturday. But for two teams who had conceded a combined 9 times between them from just 2 matches, Sunday afternoon's clash started at a very steady pace. 10 minutes passed with nothing of note filling that time, until Dendoncker saw a clear chance fall his way on the end of a deep João Moutinho corner. With the ball bouncing loose in the Palace box, Dendoncker struck out a leg to stab it home, only for McArthur to instinctively block him close to the line. In a similar situation at the other end of the field 15 minutes later, Dendoncker was unable to rise above Jordan Ayew who, looking confident from kick-off, got his head on the end of a Luka Milivojevic corner to steer the ball into the hands of the diving Rui Patricio. But instead, it was the head of Doherty which caused the most concern moments later, as he powered himself behind a Raul Jimenez cross barely 6 yards from Palace's goal line. Leaping with split-second reactions, Gaeta pulled off a remarkable save to deny the Irish fullback, hitting the turf with relief and entirely to thank for keeping his side level. Looking to build on the energy naturally sparked on by his keeper's heroics, Zaha burst into the Wolves box before mesmerising Willy Bolly on the turn only to run out of space, Patricio deflecting the ball from the Ivorian's feet and out for a corner. The minute's actions starkly contrasted those who preceded it, and a goal seemed imminent from either side. Wolves' Jota looked closest to claiming it when he swung his right foot at the ball from 18 yards, but his resulting effort was held comfortably by Gaeta. Doherty was next to try his luck but failed to connect with Moutinho's driven cross, leaving the ball to pass directly into the hands of Gaeta. Kicking off after the half-time break, the Eagles were determined to force their way into the game, and did so in emphatic fashion barely a minute into the second half. Jeffrey Slupp stylishly began the charge, working his way in on the left wing before sliding the ball into Wolves' box. Unable to deal with the assault, the visitors were out of shape when McArthur teed up the unlikely threat of Ward, who rifled in from 20 yards via a heavy ricochet off Dendoncker. The bulging net and the whistle restart in play saw Palace playing the ascendancy, enjoying chances through Ayew, Milivojevic and Zaha. The visitors' afternoon took a further turn for worse when Saïs pulled Zaha to the ground, earning his second yellow card of the clash and giving his marching orders, leaving his teammates both a goal and a man down to push back against Palace in the hope of forcing an equaliser. The chance to capitalise on Palace's dominance and shatter any hope of a Wolves comeback fell to substitute Christian Benteke, played in by Slupp and under pressure inside the penalty area. Shaping up to shoot, the Belgium international was denied by the firm palms of Patricio, who beat his effort away. Facing 10 men for the third home match in a row, Palace continued to force the visitors backwards, but found themselves under pressure in a well-matched close to play. With just minutes left ticking down through extra time, the Eagles had one last chance to bury the game when Slupp struck 1-1 against Patricio. Saving the effort, the Portuguese keeper was forced to watch, as Patrivanana and Benteke sought to net Palace's second, but their attempts were to no avail. Palace were punished in the cruelest of fashions for their wastefulness when Wolves burst into the home side's end of the pitch and fired home with seconds remaining through Jota. The full-time whistle following that signalled the goal almost immediately. So I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts, whether that be on Twitter or Facebook, then of course do head over to the respective sites and follow our accounts at Crystal Palace. Now alongside sort of your general club news, we obviously do keep it up to date with the latest transfer news. So even though we're not in January yet, there's still going to be loads of rumours, in the run up to that, and certainly some things dragging on from the summer transfer window. So if you are someone who wants to get involved with that in terms of getting a place to get all the latest Palace news, as well as obviously keeping up to date with sort of all of the ongoings in regards to transfers, of course give us a follow there. And then obviously alongside that, we obviously post interviews on there, whether that be with players, with management, and of course more sort of broader club news as well. So things about the academy, the ladies team, things like that as well, we obviously post on our account. Now obviously, if you do want to get involved, of course, do head over there, follow us there, because we do regularly update it with all of this latest news, and particularly the transfers. I would say if you're someone who really wants to know what's going on, looking at sort of the players we're linked with, and want to give your opinion on that, of course that's a really great reason for you to follow us. And of course, I suppose we also give our opinions on the account as well, so there's a few of us who run the account. So if you are someone who might disagree with something you've put out there, then of course feel free to comment as well, because obviously before games we give our reactions to sort of the press conferences and the lineup, and of course after the game there's sort of the instant match reaction there. So if you are someone who might disagree with our opinion, or maybe agrees with it, or something else you want to add to that, of course that's another reason for you to follow us, because obviously it's a great place for you guys to share your opinion. Now another great place for you guys to share your opinion is of course on YouTube. So if you're listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, obviously where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, and that's of course with 10 being the best. Now obviously, like I say every week, the main reason I want you guys to do that is just so that I can see how you rated the players' performances, and considering there's two ways we can look at this game in terms of it's a good result to get a draw. You would have taken that before the game, but then it's 2 points dropped because of that silly game management at the end. So of course there's two ways to look at this game. So of course the player ratings are also going to differ, because there were some players who played well for the most part, but then little errors is obviously what led to us conceding at the end. So of course in terms of the player ratings, feel free to share them so you can compare them to my own. I can read yours, see what you guys thought, and of course we can sort of set up a discussion on the back of that. Now even if you don't want to do that, and maybe if you're a Wolves fan and you find yourself on the video, obviously comment below with your general views of the game. Obviously a Palace perspective, and certainly my opinion is, yes, I would have been happy with the draw beforehand, but considering how we played in that second half, and the fact that we obviously got ahead and we conceded so late, literally the last kick of the game, is something that's disappointing. So it's 2 points dropped in that respect. So if you are someone who has an opinion that you want to share, which is obviously aside from player performances, anything about the game, of course feel free to comment that below. And alongside just me having to read through it and discussing with you guys, is also for other fans, whether they be Wolves or Palace fans, they find themselves on the video, listen to my views in the podcast, but also read the comment section as well. And once again, it's just all about everyone getting involved, everyone having a bit of discussion, so of course we can sort of build a more broader view of the game, I suppose, by having all different opinions put together. So like I said, feel free to share your opinions. If you've got any questions, anything you disagree with, of course feel free to also drop them below. So I might as well move on now to the player ratings. I'm going to start and go with Vicente Gaeta, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now before I go on to talk about his performance, I might as well talk about some of the things that have been happening on Twitter in terms of Gaeta. And there's actually a few sort of Premier League fan accounts actually starting to come out now and actually saying, Gaeta is actually, a really class goalkeeper, hasn't made any errors in sort of the last 26 or so games he's played for Palace. So, the fact that these sort of fan accounts now, which sort of cover all the Premier League clubs, are now coming out to say how good and how consistent Gaeta is, obviously really goes to show how good he has been, obviously over the last sort of season or so. But also, this game here, the reason they picked it out in terms of mentioning him now is because he had another good performance here, hence why I've given him the 8. Now in terms of one save in particular, which for that alone he deserves to get an 8, and that was a fantastic one-handed save right in front of the Holmesdale to obviously deny Matt Doherty, and that was sort of just before the half an hour mark. So of course, if you're looking at the two halves of the game, Wolves dominated the first half and obviously Palace dominated the second. So in terms of when Wolves were on the attack, had a great chance there with Doherty, and it was a fantastic sort of spider stretching sort of save from Gaeta in terms of reaching over, getting that one hand just to tip it over. Fantastic save. And people who've actually seen it from behind the goal, obviously those in the Holmesdale, they've said it's absolutely fantastic, and it looks even better from the angle they were sitting, which really just goes to highlight when you've got people in the stand actually saying the basic moment of the game is that save. Really goes to show how good it was. Now of course, like he always does throughout the rest of the game, he was obviously on hand to make a couple of really important saves. It wasn't one of these games where he just had to make simple ones. There were obviously his basic saves which you'd expect him to make, but the fact that again and again and again, when Wolves are having chances inside the box, he was just pulling off these fantastic saves, is what was really important to see. And, you know, like I said, with that Doherty chance, Wolves obviously were the better team in the first half, had loads of chances, probably could have been 2, maybe even 3-0 up at half time. So the fact that in that first half in particular he made all of these important saves is why I was really impressed with his performance, and that's why I've given him the 8. And like I've said, it's got to be this performance in particular, which is why some of these accounts on Twitter are actually starting to mention that he's got to be up there as one of the better goalkeepers outside the top 6, you know, alongside your Fabianskis and people like Pickford as well. So he's got to be up there, he's got to be in that bracket. But the fact that they're now starting to talk about it really goes to show, you know, how good his performances have been for Palace. Now, in terms of going into the second half, because Palace were in the ascendancy with the better team, and because we had a lot more possession, I'm not sure statistically whether that's right, but watching the game back and, you know, watching parts of the game, yeah, particular parts of the game when we were in possession, it looked like we were dominating in that respect. So it might be wrong in terms of statistically, but looking back at the game, it just looked like, and it just felt like we had a little bit more of the ball. We were more purposeful with it in terms of getting chances in, and that basically meant that Gaeta didn't really have much to do in that second half. And of course, for the goal, all he could do was basically watch, because Patrick Van Aanholt has let too much space in to let Wolves put the cross into the box. And then obviously Joe Ward, he's tried to sort of head the ball while sort of going down to the ground, and of course he totally missed the header, messed it up, and it was a really easy tap in for the goal to concede in the last minute. So realistically, fantastic saves, couldn't do anything about the goal, and another fine performance. What more is there to say? You know, to be honest, you know, Gaeta fully deserves the 8 I've given him. And, you know, once again, going back to that point about Twitter, and I know I keep repeating it, but, you know, if Gaeta can just continue with these consistent performances for us, that would obviously be great. But also in terms of him actually finally getting that recognition he deserves, because, you know, fans of other clubs don't seem to notice it. They just go, yeah, he's just your average Premier League goalkeeper. But actually now they're starting to notice it, which of course is good for us. But also in terms of just, you know, putting his profile up and saying actually he is a good goalkeeper, he's a class goalkeeper, great to get him on a free. Of course, long may that continue. So once again, for Gaeta here, fully deserving of the 8 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the defence, starting with the right back Joe Ward, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, Ward was one of these performances where, you know, there's going to be a bit of variation in terms of what people are going to rate him, because I think for the most part, I think he was quite good in the game. But like I've said, and I mentioned just a short minute ago, you know, that goal we conceded in the last minute was obviously 50-50 between Patrick Van Aanholt and of course Joe Ward himself. So I'll move on to the goal in a minute. But in terms of his performance overall, I've given him a 6 because I think he was fairly steady at right back. You know, in recent games we have criticised him quite a lot because, you know, he isn't quite up to that standard that we obviously came to see with Wan-Bissaka this season, but then last season. But then obviously he had a few other good games this season, so it's been a bit hot and cold from Ward this season, and this was one of his better games for Palace in the fact that he was steady, he was fairly consistent with his performance, done what he had to do defensively, and considering the fact that he scored the goal, even though it's not his goal, it's an own goal now, but he was the guy who had the shot, the fact that he also had that presence going forward as well was of course great to see. Now, there was one chance in particular where he gave the ball away quite cheaply in the first half, and that really resonates for me because it goes back to Gaeta in terms of making these important saves. Obviously, Ward made that mistake and Gaeta had to bail him out, but I suppose, you know, that's what you would expect from your team. You know, you want all your teammates to work together, that if a defender makes a mistake, you've obviously got your extra line of defence there in the goalkeeper, and luckily for us that obviously came good. So, you know, other than that mistake, there isn't really too much more about that first half performance I can really criticise, because like I said, I think he was steady, and bar that mistake, he was fairly good. Now, the thing I really liked, and this is something that if he didn't make that mistake towards the end of the game, I'll probably be giving him a 7 for his performance, is actually his attacking work, because we know he's not the greatest going forward, but actually just the effort he showed to actually, you know, get forward as much as possible to actually support the attack. So not just going forward and putting balls into the box, but to be that option on the attack was of course great to see as well. And the fact that it was sort of epitomised with the fact that he got that deflected effort right on the edge of the box, and that obviously broke deadlock literally a minute into the second half, I think it was. So the fact that so shortly after half time he literally came out refreshed, and actually for a right back who's normally not that attacking, the fact that he found himself in a prime position to hit a ball from just outside the box. Yes, it took a deflection, and yes, it was probably going wide, but all goals count, and you know, if he didn't have that shot, if he wasn't in that position in the first place, then nothing would have come off of it. So whilst we know and we've seen previously he can score goals from outside the box. And yes, this one was probably going wide, but just that pure fact that he was in that good attacking position was something that really did impress me. Now, like I've said, you know, talking about that first half and start of the second half, would have been a fantastic performance, probably deserving of a 7. But the unfortunate thing for him is obviously, like I said, the goal we conceded. He was the man who slipped at that vital moment. Obviously, the ball's come into the box after Van Aanholt left too much space out wide. And obviously Ward, rather than trying to head it, or, you know, it depends which way you look at the video, because of course he ends up on the floor and the player just ends up, you know, literally a tap in from 2 yards out anyway. But what Ward really should have been doing, he should have tried to, you know, get a solid header on it. And if he can't get a header on it and he went to ground, at least try and at least get up straight away, or just stick your leg up and do something to at least try and block the Wolves player from getting the end of that shot. But like I said, Jota took full advantage of that. You know, the fact that Ward wasn't able to win the header, Jota just made it, well, easiest chance really Jota's ever going to have. And obviously easy for him to score, and it was really disappointing because we had a really good second half performance. We rightly got ahead, and yes, we were wasteful in terms of a number of our chances, which are obviously going to talk about. But yes, we were wasteful, but likewise, if we didn't make this little mistake, if we didn't have these lapses of concentration, then we wouldn't concede sloppy goals like this, and we wouldn't let a team like Wolves, who looked knackered at the end, but we seem to be more knackered than them, having played less games this season. You know, we allowed them to break the deadlock, even though, you know, we really should have taken full advantage towards the end of the game. So once again, Joe Ward here playing at right back, fully deserving of the 6 I've given him. And if it weren't for that little mistake he made towards the end of the game, he probably would have got a 7 for his performance. So now going to move on to our first centre back, and that is Gary Cahill, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now, once again, you know, what can I say? Because week in, week out, Gary Cahill is performing so well, playing to the highest standard. And this was a game yet again where he showed his experience, showed his class as centre-back, and done what he had to do defensively. And, you know, when you consider the goal we conceded, you can pinpoint who that was exactly down to. Had nothing to do with him. That just really goes to show that, you know, how good he was in the game, and the fact that he kept a team who've got really good attacking players like Wolves. He kept them actually quiet in the game, was something really quite impressive. Now, once again, you know, in terms of that centre-back partnership, it was Cahill and Sakho, which I predicted, but there was a bit of discussion about it. But I think going forward, until Tompkins is back fit, you know, Cahill and Sakho, that lining up in the centre of defence, that's going to be our strongest pairing. And actually, we saw in this game here, even though Sakho was a bit shaky to begin with, as a partnership, as a unit, Cahill and Sakho do work really well. Now, the one thing I was impressed with Cahill, aside from his defensive work, is just his ability to actually get the ball forward and actually help us play from the back. And this wasn't just occasionally trying to play out the back. It was every time we had possession in our own half, you know, give the ball back to Cahill, and rather than trying to pump it long or just passing it to the fullbacks and passing it back again, rather than doing that, we actually had people like Cahill and Sakho as well to an extent actually getting on the ball, driving forward, and just helping us to actually play out from the back at every opportunity. And that's something I really was impressed with. And I think, obviously, we know Cahill's got the quality, but just that experience as well, to know when to play forward, when to obviously just either pass back, or, you know, just that game management side of his game in terms of getting that mix right, and when he does play it forward, playing it well, playing it really well, was of course something I was really impressed with. In terms of his defensive work, like he always does, you know, putting his body on the line, particularly, you know, in terms of getting down low and, you know, getting in the way of all of Wolves' chances, was of course great to see. And, you know, I talked about Gaeta making important saves and, you know, vital in terms of keeping us, keeping it 0-0 at half time. Cahill was exactly the same, you know, making these vital challenges, getting these blocks in, you know, making himself really big and winning these headed clearances. That was of course really, really great to see. And, you know, I always go back to that point because I think it's really important in terms of the experience and skill. That's exactly what we saw in this game here. And I suppose what you've got to also add into it is his positional play, because that brings his experience into it. Because positionally, I think he was always in the right place, telling others to get into the right place, marshalling the rest of the back four. That was obviously really good as well. And of course, the reading of the game was superb in terms of knowing when to go forward, knowing when to go back, and just timing his challenges really well. And I suppose when you've got someone with as good as a performance that is, you know, deserving of an 8, he was very unfortunate not to actually be on the winning side. Obviously, we drew the game, and, you know, like I said, before the game I would have taken that, but given the circumstances, last minute equaliser, I probably would have said we'd probably deserved all 3 points if it weren't for our terrible defending. And I think, you know, Cahill can count himself very lucky that we didn't, unlucky that we didn't win that game, because for his defensive contribution he certainly would have deserved it. So once again here, another stellar performance from Gary Cahill, and you know, the fact that we got him on a 2-year deal, if he can continue like this, then obviously it's going to be a great signing for us going forward. So I'm now going to move on to his centre-back partner, and that is of course Mamadou Sakho. I'm going to give him a 6 overall, because I do think, considering, you know, he wasn't quite fully fit last weekend, or he weren't great, you know, I think this was a performance in the right direction, him still getting back to full fitness, but it was still a performance where we saw his quality, and that's something we didn't of course see last weekend. Now, I already mentioned it already in terms of that partnership with Cahill and Sakho. I personally, if you're looking at it on paper, you'd go, that will work really well. And obviously we had to see it in person to see whether it did or could work. And actually, in the last few games, we've seen it actually can be quite a good defensive partnership. So, you know, we obviously don't know when Tompkins will be back and whether he'll be first choice again or be in that first choice centre-back pairing. But whatever happens, I do think going forward we've got a safe pair of defenders here in Sakho and Cahill. Now, obviously, you know, you can understand conceding 4 goals, your first game back against Spurs last weekend. You can expect him maybe to be a bit shaky, bit sort of lacking of confidence because of obviously conceding the 4 goals. That really didn't seem to affect him, because he, even though he still doesn't look fully match fit, he's still done what he normally does, you know, in terms of being that man who can be that solid wall at the back, do all of his defensive duties. And you know, like I've said, I'm not gonna sit here and say he didn't look tired, he didn't look like he was struggling, because there were times, particularly in that first half, where he looked quite sluggish, just still looked a bit slow. And yes, he was giving the ball away quite cheaply, and he was very guilty of that on certain occasions, of just giving the ball away quite cheaply. Yes, that was the case, but like I've said, in that second half, he seemed to sort of put that sluggish, sort of lacklustre performance in the first half behind him. And you know, there was one really important block from Diego Jota in particular in that second half to deny him his goal scoring chance. So it's things like that which I really like from Sakho, because yes, he may have been quite average throughout the whole game, but when it matters, he can put his body on the line, as we saw with that important block to deny Jota. So once again here, Mamadou Sakho fully deserving of the 6 I've given him. If he had just been a little bit better with his passing and not been as sluggish, and if he just looked a little bit more, if he had been a little bit more match fit, I think it would have improved his performance even more. But you know, on reflection, I do think the 6 I've given him is a fair result overall. So I'm now going to move on to the final play in our defence, and that is of course the left back Patrick Van Aanholt, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now this one, once again, is a sort of a controversial one, in the fact that some people, given the fact that the goal we conceded was, you know, 50% down to him, obviously you're going to look at it and go, he had a really terrible game. But I've given him the 6 because I do think there were some good parts of his game. But then, like I've said, the goal we conceded was of course a really major negative inside of his game. Now, of course, playing on that left hand side, he was facing up against the pace of Adama Traore. We know how good he can be. We obviously wanted Palace to sign him before he obviously went to Wolves. And I think that Patrick Van Aanholt, we know he's got pace, but actually, considering the Traore is just a little bit faster than him, I think he stood up to that test well. He dealt with the threat that he had, and you know, we know Traore may not have the best of end product, but when he's got that speed, he can whip a ball in, and of course that's what could cause us problems. So the fact that we had someone like Van Aanholt making himself count, keeping up with him pace wise, and basically limiting his chances was of course good to see. Now, aside from that defensive side of his work, I think he got forward really well. So much like Joe Ward on the other side, I think he got forward well. As always, obviously, you know, in terms of, we know he likes to go forward, but this game he was a lot more, I suppose, efficient in terms of his forward play, in terms of getting into good positions, getting to the end of balls, doing the 1-2s, threading through other players, and that was of course great to see. And you know, overall I think he put in a solid display, but defensively he still could have done better, particularly with that goal. And you know, you've just got to look back at it. You know, obviously we should have had better game management in terms of, it's the 95th minute of the game, rather than trying to go on the counter attack, just hold the ball in midfield, just pass it around or take it to the corner flag. Instead we try and counter, give away possession, and yes, that's bad enough, but then you've got someone like Van Aanholt who makes it so easy for the Wolves player just to chip the ball into the box. You know, what Van Aanholt should be doing there is sticking really close to his man, you know, sticking his leg out, trying to just block any sort of cross he was trying to put into the area. But instead, Van Aanholt sort of just stood there, gave him a yard of space, which was more than enough for him to chip the ball in to the far post. So, you know, for all of the good work he put in terms of dealing with Traore and sort of standing up to that threat well and getting forward as well, I've given him a 6 because all of that good work. It wasn't great, because of course there were other times where he could have done better, but just for that, how poor and how sort of, I suppose it's just so simple, because I'm sure even people sort of playing school football will know you don't let an attacking player that much space on the edge of the box to whip a cross in. So, you know, really should have done better there. But then likewise, Joe Ward, even though it's quite unlucky that he missed a header, he also should have done better. So in terms of that goal we conceded, it's obviously 50-50 for me as to who's at fault, but I do think he deserves these 6 I've given him. Obviously some people will disagree and say he was absolutely terrible defensively, but giving him the benefit of the doubt, some good parts, some bad parts of his game, I do think on reflection these 6 is a fair result. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our midfield, and that is of course the captain Luka Milivojevic, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Then once again, this is another player who might divide opinion, because, you know, overall some people thought he had a bit of a disappointing game in terms of he wasn't really terrible in the game, but he didn't really have that much impact on the game. And then likewise, there's other people going, actually his performance in the midfield in terms of restricting Wolves was actually quite good. And I'm sort of in the middle, where looking back at his performance, I think the 7 is a fair result, considering the fact that he had some good parts of his play in the midfield, but then likewise there were other parts of his game where it was a little bit lacking, and we would have liked to see a little bit more from him. And I suppose the word to use is, or the phrase is, steady but unspectacular, because that's exactly what his performance was. Much like Joe Ward, done what he had to do, sort of went along as the game went by, and of course it wasn't really spectacular. He just done what he had to do. So in terms of his influence in the midfield, I think he was a calming influence in the fact that he just kept the team going, particularly in that first half where we weren't playing great. And in terms of coming out for the second half, something must have been said, because obviously the whole team were playing better, but in terms of Luka keeping to that game plan, it just seemed to him just being calm, being able to play down the middle. And, you know, like I say every week, you know, your main part of the midfield is obviously to frustrate the opposition and obviously, you know, break down whatever they have in midfield. And the fact that Milivojevic done that really well is something which I was quite impressed with him playing down the middle. But overall, you know, other than a few shots he had from sort of outside the area, you know, 2 of them in particular sort of deflecting out for corners, there isn't really much to say about his game offensively. But I suppose defensively he done what he had to do, and like I said, it was a steady but unspectacular performance, because that's exactly what I sort of gauge from his performance, in the fact that there were some good parts, some sort of average parts, and I think on the whole I do think these 7 is a fair result. And, you know, lots of people have been criticising him recently, saying, oh, he's not as good as he used to be, or, you know, he's not necessarily got going quite yet this season. But, you know, with performances like this, you just want to see a player just doing their shift, just doing their bit for the team and helping us get through games. That's exactly what we got from his performance here, and certainly something we obviously want to see from other players going forward. So once again here, the captain, Luka Milivojevic, I do think these 7 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to one of his midfield partners, and that is of course Cheku Karte, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now this is yet another one which might divide opinion. Obviously some people thought he had a fantastic game, and I'm certainly sort of more towards that bracket. And then other people saying actually there were a few little moments here and there where he obviously should have done better. So I do think overall the 7 is a fair result. Now there was obviously, I might as well start with a negative. There was one chance in particular where he obviously allowed Dendoncker to actually break free from him quite early on. I think it was in quite an early corner, sort of early stages of the game. Obviously Wolves have whipped in the corner, and obviously Dendoncker was able to get free and obviously get connection on it. And whilst nothing did come off of that, obviously it was a little bit disappointing to see Karte, one of the more physical players, actually just allow someone like Dendoncker to so easily get around him. So I suppose little moments like this, little lapses of concentration, which is why, you know, some people have highlighted him going, you know, could have done better. But the majority of his performance, even though he wasn't at his best, because we know how good he can be, this was certainly got to be up there in terms of one of his better performances, in the fact that he worked really hard to actually break up play, tried to get us on the ball as much as possible. And you've just got to look at the goal we scored, or the own goal. You know, obviously a great run by Jeffrey Slop. Then obviously Kjarte's managed to wriggle with the ball, pass it to MacArthur to Ward. Of course, Ward's had that shot which deflected in. So not only was he obviously involved defensively by breaking up play, but he found himself loads of times, you know, up in the opposition's half, and quite often in the penalty area as well. So not only was he doing his, you know, the hard work defensively by breaking up the play and actually driving us forward, but actually he found himself in these quite advanced positions as well. Now obviously that's one of the reasons why people have put him really highly up, in the fact that his defensive work and obviously the offensive positioning was really, really good. But then likewise, I understand why a few people are going, you know, yes, he was good, but there was still a few moments in the game which he could have done better. And that's why I've given him a 7, because I think that looking back at his performance, yes, there was that little blip with Dendoncker in particular from that early corner, but early on in the game, and particularly the first half, we weren't great anyway. So the fact that he came out the second half, and even though he wasn't quite at his best, he still performed really well. So I do think these 7 overall is a fair result, and certainly he's got a big questions as to what should be our midfield partnership going forward. Obviously we've started with Maya, we've obviously got people like Camarasa and McCarthy on the bench, so we've got options there. But I think Chiarte is certainly making a stake or a claim to get into the side, purely based on the fact that whenever he does play, that tenacity, that energy, that sort of drive and physicality he brings to the team seems to really benefit us, as we saw here against Wolves the other day. So once again here, Cheikh Chiarte fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our midfield, and that is of course James McArthur, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. So once again, this is a player who was up for quite a lot of debate before the game, because of course he was injured against Tottenham, and whilst lots of people have criticised him in the games before Tottenham, it obviously was quite obvious the fact that we missed the work he'd done in the game. And, you know, I'm not saying we would have won or we would have even got a draw against Tottenham if McArthur would have been there, but I suppose even though his performances quite often go unnoticed, and it was so noticeable that when he wasn't there, we obviously didn't play that great. So it was nice to see him back in the team, and certainly did make his influence count. Now, of course, once again, like I said, he missed out, and, you know, rightly so. He's one of Roy Hodgson's favourite players and one of the more versatile players that Hodgson likes to use, so rightly so. And, you know, as we predicted, he went straight back into that starting 11. And to be honest, there was one block in particular which sort of just made up for his, you know, his inclusion in the team. You know, that was like, yep, you know, good job actually putting him in the team, because he's that guy you can count on. And that was, of course, really great chance early on in the game, and that was a crucial block to deny Dendoncker. Once again, Dendoncker got a chance inside the box, and of course McArthur was there just in front of the line to obviously block the effort and clear the danger. So not only was McArthur doing alright in his midfield performance, but you can always rely on him to be in that right place at that right time to make really important blocks in and around the box. And certainly that was it, because Dendoncker, you know, he could have gone through, scored that chance, 1-0, Wolves would have been a different story. So once again, McArthur, at the key moments, he's there to obviously make the right decisions. And I think overall, just like I said, you know, we missed him against Tottenham, and what we were missing against Tottenham in terms of our midfield performance, that's what McArthur brought back into the side, in terms of working hard, having that tenacity, as we saw with the Joe Ward own goal, or the Joe Ward's goal, which of course was given as an own goal. That good work obviously from Slop and Chiarte, but also from McArthur in terms of finding Joe Ward in the space on the edge of the area and obviously supplying him the ball. So not only was he working hard in terms of just that defensive side of his work, but actually getting on the end of balls, trying to carry possession, trying to maintain it, trying to drive us forward. Everything about his game was obviously, you know, really great to see. And yes, he obviously took a yellow card for the team in the first half. Sometimes you just got to do that, you know. He took a yellow card. Sometimes you just got to take that, move on. That's certainly what he did. And of course, like I already mentioned, you know, even though it went down as an own goal, so it's not going to count as an assist. But of course, he got the assist, let's call it, for Ward's goal. And like I said, that was all because of his ability to obviously get into the area in the first place, in terms of being that far up the pitch, but also in terms of just being able to find Joe Ward in space on the edge of the area. So once again here, McArthur, a great miss last weekend, so of course nice to see him back into the side. A good performance here where, you know, made really important blocks, obviously, to deny Dendoncker, and just his overall performance was really good in terms of him just working hard for the team. So once again here, James McArthur, I do think he does deserve the 7 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to one of the first players in our front three, and that is of course Jeffrey Schlupp, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now this one may come as a bit of a surprise, obviously, because there were some parts of his game, particularly Joe Ward's goal, or the own goal. You know, a lot of that, well, the good work was obviously down to Jeffrey Schlupp in terms of making that run and actually getting the ball into the box into the first place. Now, yes, that was the case, but then I've seen quite a lot of other people, and I've sort of looked at different opinions, and I'm like, actually, yeah, you know, maybe a 5 is a fair result, considering the fact that there are little moments in the game, and certainly the overall performance where he could have done better. Now, in terms of you know, last weekend, obviously that was a really disappointing 4-0 loss, but obviously Jeffrey Schlupp was playing in a more central role there, and that's something we've come to see from him. You know, last season and particularly beginning of this season, we've seen him utilised quite well in that central midfield role. But I actually think that, you know, even though he thrives in that role, he can also do a job out wide. And, you know, whilst he's done alright there, I think, you know, the reason I've given him a 5 is just that sort of move back to left wing after starting in central midfield. You know, he's played sort of last few months or so, he's played as a central midfielder, so moving him back out wide seemed to affect his performance, and he weren't necessarily that effective. Now, you could argue the fact that he played in midfield last week against Tottenham and didn't do that great, you could argue, okay, put him back out wide because he wasn't great last weekend. But as we've seen the last 4 months, and I suppose you've got to look at the last sort of season and a half where he's played in central midfield, he's done really good there. So when moved back out wide, you can understand him sort of not playing that well, and that's exactly what he was here. Now, in terms of possession, yes, there were a few good times where he got forward, particularly with that Joe Ward goal, obviously in terms of making that drive and run into the box and obviously offloading the ball to Chiarte. Yes, that was the case, but lots of other times he was wasteful in possession, giving the ball away. And, you know, when you're meant to be one of the highest sort of left players on the field in terms of being that attacking outlet down that left hand side, we would have just expected a little bit more from him, because when you give him possession, we want you to carry it forward, maybe get to the byline, put a cross in, or, you know, look for Vanana on the overlap, or look to pass the ball in field to someone like MacArthur or Chiarte. So whilst you know there were a few good times in terms of his possession, there were other times where he was quite wasteful. You know, you're being that guy on that left wing, you're that main attacking threat, so you've got to carry that ball down that left hand side, not give it away. But unluckily for us, obviously, he couldn't quite do that. And of course, a chance right at the end to obviously seal the win for Palace. You know, we obviously will talk about Benteke later. He had a gilt-edged chance which he should have finished, but then likewise Jeffrey Slupp had a chance, a really golden chance to seal that win later on, make it 2-0, game over, great 3 points. But obviously, you know, much like Benteke, couldn't quite finish the chance, and of course we go on sort of ruining their missed chances in the fact that just, you know, a few seconds earlier or a little bit more spin on the ball, you know, little things like this, you know, if we could done it a little bit differently, then maybe we could have come away from the game with a little bit of a different result. But once again here, Jeffrey Slupp, you know, this one's obviously up for debate. Some people might agree, some people might disagree, but I think it was just a slightly disappointing performance given the high standards we've obviously seen from him recently. So once again here, I do think Jeffrey Slupp does deserve the 5 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the other winger, obviously in the team, playing on the right hand side, and that is Wilfried Zaha, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now obviously I suppose I might as well start by talking about his season as a whole. Obviously all of that transfer debacle, transfer requests here, and obviously rumours about obviously what was going to happen in the summer, but of course there's already rumours about what's going to happen in January. So of course his performance has been a bit have been a bit stop-start this season. Few good spells here and there, but then on the whole been a little bit disappointing. And you know, I've seen a few people call this one of his best game, or the best game he's played this season, and certainly I do think that's the case. You know, we've done an interview with Hopkin looking to curl one, putting a few things straight, and you know, even though the media want to sort of strew that story and sort of twist it and, you know, put it on a negative, it was a really positive interview from you know what you've heard. And you know, you've got to listen to what the people who actually done the interview have said. You know, Hopkin looking to curl one, even Zaha's come out and said, you know, it was a really positive interview. That's the sort of outlet we were going to look at. So it seems like he's put everything behind him now, which of course is great to see, and it certainly was reflective of his performance. If he, you know, certainly if he's put everything behind him, because he was more focused and actually, you know, played a really important game here. Now, obviously, you know, we know he can play on the left or the right, or, you know, quite recently, you know, he's played sort of more as a central forward role, and obviously this game here found himself starting on the right wing. Although, you know, in terms of supporting Jordan Ayew, he found himself quite often playing in that sort of centre forward role, supporting people like Ayew, because Ayew does all of the running, does all the hard work. So if you've got someone like Jeffrey Slupp or Zaha to work off of him, obviously makes his life easier, but also gives you a more sort of dynamic attack. So the fact that Zaha was able to provide that support, as well as just sort of the trickery and the skill and the pace that he normally has, is of course great to see. And you know, there was one video in particular, I think it was up against Bolly, where yes, even though Zaha, or, you know, he didn't get anything out of it, just the skill in terms of getting past Bolly, and even though he sort of got the better of him anyway in the end, Bolly, just that skill and that trickery is obviously something which of course is really, really great to see. And you know, there were other times as well where he obviously found himself on the opposite flank, so just that sort of
adaptability, just a change in game, change your position, as well as sort of supporting your other attacking players, was of course great to see. And he caused Wolves quite a lot of problems. Obviously we know that anyway because of his quality, but given he's been a bit lacklustre in games this season, this was a game where he was on point, on key, causing the oppositions all kind of problems, and of course was that outlet for Palace, because against Tottenham, yes, he was one of our better players, but he didn't really have that chance to go forward, couldn't really be that focal point of the attack, whereas here we sort of got that attacking play a little bit better. And of course Zaha was one of the players who benefited off of that, because he was that outlet, he was that main guy. We were going to attack through him, we were going to allow him to link up with people like Ayew, and it really seemed to reflect in his performance. That's why I've given him the 8, because I was just really impressed with obviously his individual work and his individual skill and pace, but just how he worked and combined with other players around him was a thing that was of course really impressive. And I suppose what you've got to look at it is, I've given him an 8 here, considering all of his other performances this season have been sort of 5s and 6s. Really goes to show how good he was here. And I suppose, like people have said across Twitter and in general, right, really talking to people, he showed signs of getting back to his best, or slowly sort of getting closer to how he ended last season. So of course that's great to see. And going back to that interview, him putting things straight, saying he loves the club, etc, etc, great interview. That seems to reflect in his performance, like I've said, in terms of getting closer to how he was before and just putting what's happened behind him. So once again here, really impressive performance from Wilfried Zaha, fully deserving of the 8 I've given him. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our starting 11, and that is of course Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now I might as well start by mentioning, obviously he was Palace's Player of the Month for August, and I probably did mention it in some of the previous podcasts, but I might as well put that out there. He's obviously had a great start to the season, and this game was sort of no different, with his hard working sort of performance, loads of energy, and that's exactly what we got here. So the fact that he got Player of the Month for August didn't let that sort of overcome him, and he's just been able to sort of continue with that consistency of what he showed against August, and he's obviously brought it into September. Now, in terms of his performance here, why is he fully deserving of a 7? The fact that he worked hard up top again, and yes, he had little reward. Yes, he didn't get many chances. Yes, he didn't create many chances as such. But just having that energy up top, being that outlet, and just really just showing a little bit more movement, and say someone like Benteke has, that is something which is really quite key for us. And he's showing signs of being a really shrewd signing from Palace, if indeed he was signed for, what was it, £2.5 million, because what we've seen from him so far is really good movement, good agility, good pace, obviously the good energy as well, and that was of course great to see. Now, of course, it was a little bit disappointing that he had a few sights on goal and probably should have done a little bit better with them. But I've given him a 7 because even though that was the case, nevertheless, he put in a good shift up top, was doing what he had to do for the team. And, when you consider how good last season the Wolves' defence were, people like Bolly and Doherty, great defenders. Ayew was keeping them occupied, keeping them busy, being a handful for them. So the fact that even if he's not going to have any sort of end product, or he's not going to have any chances in the game, at least caused problems for the defenders, which obviously allows people like Zaha and Slup and obviously Joe Ward, as we saw, to actually get forward and exploit the spaces left by the defenders, because people like Ayew are just keeping them occupied, was of course great to see. And in terms of whenever Wolves were in possession, he was obviously chasing down every ball, so not giving them time on it, and of course bringing others into play as well. And just the fact that he continuously runs, tirelessly runs, holds up the ball, brings others into play, everything about his game just sort of shouts a team player, because of course he doesn't have to do that. He could just be the focal point of the attack, and everything has to come through him. But the fact that he does the hard work, creates chances for himself, but mainly is looking to benefit the whole team by getting others involved and just working tirelessly for that, the greater cause, was of course great to see. And like I've said at the beginning, obviously Player of the Month for August, long may performances like this continue, because of course it's really great to see obviously a Palace signing, a really shrewd signing at that, actually playing well, but also nice to see a player like him, who we saw last season him working hard, but nothing really came off of him now. So it's nice to see him actually finally sort of get into that groove and actually put in really good performances. So once again here, Jordan Ayew, fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. So just going to move briefly on to the subs. Don't really want to talk too much about them, because they weren't really much to talk about anyway in regards to them. So of course Christian Benteke came on for Ayew, 69 minutes or so. Going to give him a 4 because he obviously had a really great chance to make it 2-0 not long after coming on, so literally been on a minute or so, and really should have done better, because the ball's coming to him inside the box, and rather than trying to hit it first time or just taking one touch just to get in the right position then shooting, he's taken about 3 or 4 touches, He's obviously moved slightly more to the right, obviously had a shot, and then straight over Rui Patricio. So a chance like that, golden opportunity, you're right in the box. Any good striker or any I'm not going to say he's not got confidence now, because we've seen enough from him recently to go, you just sort of lost your quality now. But in terms of that chance, it's not about not having confidence, because you've taken far too many touches. You should have hit that first or even second time, got it in, at least tried to get it past the goalkeeper, but instead you've taken too many touches. Players are drawn around you. You've obviously done that panic shot, and of course is obviously right into the hands of him. And aside from that chance, because of course you can forgive him for one chance if he does better with other chances he had in the game, but the fact that with that chance he should have done better, but then other chances he had in the game didn't get enough on it. On other chances, it didn't really show any sort of more effort or the energy that Ayew had showed in the game. So the fact that he couldn't even make up for that little mistake with maybe another few chances in the game was of course really disappointing. And when you consider he had 20 minutes or so to actually make an impact, the fact there isn't really much to talk about really just goes to show how lacklustre and sort of how inefficient he is in the team anymore. Because I'd much rather us actually keep Ayew on, because I think a tired Ayew and maybe bringing someone on in the midfield instead, just to bolster that midfield, would be a better option at the moment than bringing Benteke on. Because whether it's his confidence, whether it's his quality gone, whatever it is, he really needs to do a lot better. Obviously James McCarthy came on for MacArthur, 83 minutes or so, going to give him a 5. He was obviously just brought on just to help us see out the game. Obviously, ultimately, we did go on to draw the game anyway, but, none of that was really down to McCarthy. And I think that, in terms of his contribution, made a few important challenges here and there in the midfield. And that's what you want from a player coming off the bench. You want someone, unlike Benteke, where he was obviously had a golden chance, didn't do it. Obviously, it's a bit different playing in midfield, but still, McCarthy came on to obviously help see the game out, and he done his job. He done what he had to do, unlike Benteke, who obviously came on to obviously, to give us fresh legs for Ayew, but also to obviously finish chances, which of course he didn't do there. Now, in terms of just a small summary of the game, obviously you've got to look at the first half and go, we were quite lucky not to be behind at half time, and that was just because of our movement, our tempo, and considering Wolves have played a lot more games than us, Europa League and obviously the Premier League as well. We obviously would expect to play a little bit better than them, but of course they dominated that first half. And the fact that we had that lack of movement was a little bit concerning, but then the fact that we addressed those things quite radically, I suppose, in that second half, by actually giving us a bit more movement, giving us that more tempo, a bit more energy, and just not giving Wolves any time, and actually making good use of our possession was of course great to see. And you've just got to look at the second half as a whole was better, but the first sort of 5 minutes or so, we came out all guns blazing, kept passing the ball around, kept making life difficult for Wolves. And the fact that we scored our goal literally 1 minute after the game restarted for the second half just shows how that we changed that mentality from being sluggish, not having movement for one another, and actually not having that tempo. We upped the tempo and literally kicked off and then went up the other end of the pitch, and obviously ended up scoring. And yes, it didn't last long, because of course if you start so well, you kind of sort of that energy, that's sort of it is going to drain out. But still, in terms of that second half performance, a lot better, a lot more domination in terms of possession and in terms of chances. So of course that was great to see. Now, of course, you've got to look at the Villa game a few weeks ago. Obviously, looking at that going, we obviously got lucky in terms of that last minute goal getting disallowed, or it wasn't really disallowed because the whistle had already blown. So of course that was a debate we had then, but we didn't learn from that in terms of our game management. You're literally in the 95th minute of the game, hold the ball out in the corner, or at least just pass the ball around in midfield, but instead we try and go on the attack, lose possession, and we end up scoring. So once again, that poor game management at the end is, obviously why we ended up drawing the game. But also, if we just taken the two chances we had, the one from Benteke, the one from Slav, if we had just taken these two chances, then we obviously would have put the game to bed. So whilst you could look at it and go, poor game management, conceding so late on in the game, you've also got to look at it and go, 1-0 was a very fine margin anyway, so we should have done more to obviously get ahead and obviously kill the game right there. Now, in terms of Benteke, yet again, he just seems to I don't know, being derived of confidence, derived of quality, whatever it is, he's not playing up to the standards he's set previously. And I think now I'm sort of more going towards the thing of, we need to, get rid of him ASAP, because he doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon in terms of quality wise. And it's just really disappointing, because he started well for us, but now it just seems to have sort of gone downhill. Now, in terms of just the small summary of the game, obviously, like I've said, 2 points thrown away, because of that poor management and lack of us actually taking chances. And also you've got to look at the errors by obviously Patrick Van Aanholt letting the cross come in, and of course the laughable error, I suppose, what you've got to say from Joe Ward. You know, you should really be winning that header there, or at least if he loses the header, actually just trying to block the ball rather than just sort of just going to ground and, you know, just sort of sluggishly getting up. And of course, likewise, you know, Patrick Van Aanholt should really be doing better there. So whilst this was a disappointing game, we've got 8 points from 6 games, which I think, you know, a point a game ratio is fine for us in terms of, you know, just plodding through the season. But of course, it's, you know, early days still, and there's like sort of, I think, 10 other teams on 8 points, so there's nothing really in terms of the table to look at. But still, it's a point as a point. I would have taken it before the game, but of course, if it weren't for that poor game management, of course, scoring our chances, we of course would have had the 3 points as opposed to the 1. So of course it is 2 points dropped. But what we've got to do, regroup ourselves, you know, continue to be defensive solid, you know, sort of keep that defensive work and continue that during the week. And of course, in terms of the attacking work, try and get something out of Benteke, try and just help us improve offensively, because of course we've got a really big game against Norwich. Obviously you wouldn't normally say it's a big game, but Norwich have played superbly well this season, so a big game there obviously at Selhurst next weekend. Let's try and actually play really well defensively like we did in the second half, and let's not have a repeat of this weekend's game where of course the game management obviously cost us dearly. So now I'm going to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and why I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now obviously, in what was a good second half performance in particular, and obviously a little bit disappointing in terms of the result, but in terms of the performance, I think it was an alright team performance. There of course was quite a number of players I really could have included in here, you know, in terms of how good their performance was. And obviously likewise there are other players who, you know, some people will put them in there, but then some people will go 100% don't put them in there. So I do think the 4 players I put forward obviously are a reflection of positions across the field, but also, you know, a spectrum of different performances. You know, there's going to be people who might disagree with this. You know, I think one name in particular was Joe Ward. Yes, he was at fault for obviously the goal we conceded, but of course, you know, offensively and defensively on the whole, other than that terrible mistake, he was quite good. So I 100% don't agree with him being put forward for the award, but some people on Twitter have suggested it. You've got to look at someone like Cheku Kouyaté, who once again, really hard working, very energetic performance, you know, could be on the shortlist. But you know, I do think, you know, on the reflection, I do think the 4 players who I'm just going to mention, you know, really do deserve, you know, a little bit more praise in terms of their performances. So I've gone with Vicente Gaeta, Gary Cahill, Wilfred Zaha and Jordan Ayew. So in terms of Vicente Gaeta's performance, you know, what is there to say? That one save in particular from Matt Doherty was obviously fantastic, you know, just on the half an hour mark, obviously to keep us in the game and get us to 0-0 at half time. But the fact that he just made a plethora of loads of fantastic saves to obviously, particularly in that first half, to obviously keep us in the game, and just had a fine performance in terms of, you know, just doing everything he could to obviously keep Wolves out of the net was of course great to see. And for that one save in particular, you know, from Matt Doherty, you know, he obviously deserves credit there. Obviously, Gary Cahill, once again, shown his experience, you know, helped to get Palace on the ball, looked to help us drive forward. So not only was it his defensive work in terms of the challenges, blocks and clearances, which I was impressed with, just having that ability to drive the ball forward, use that experience and game awareness to know when to do it, when not to do it, was of course great to see. So for his defensive work and obviously that ball playing ability, it's why I put Gary Cahill forward. Obviously Zaha, one of his or his best performance of the season. The fact that he found himself, you know, playing out wide but drifting inside to help people like Ayew. So the fact that he was helping his teammates around him, as well as obviously just causing a problem to the Wolves backline like he normally does, was of course great to see. And just the fact that even though Wolves have got a good defensive unit at the back, the fact that Zaha was just causing them problems by just doing what he hasn't quite sort of got back into doing this season was of course great to see. And even though he's had a slow start to the season, it was just nice to see him actually come back with a bang and actually just have a really, really good overall attacking performance. And of course, Jordan Ayew, the final player, you know, he's been on here nearly almost every game this season, and it's all down to him working hard up top. And yes, there's been little reward in terms of this game here, not getting a goal or not getting an assist, but just having the few sights on goal and just having that effort, having that energy to drive forward, linking up with others and just having that hold-up play and working tirelessly for the team is something which of course we really need to hold on to, because like I've said already, £2.5 million signing. He's performing really well, and just that effort he brings to the side is obviously quite key to our performances. Now, for me, I do think there is only one clear winner. Obviously, all of these players you could obviously argue for and against them, but for me, I'm going to give it to Vicente Gaeta. So congratulations, Gaeta. You don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was yet another solid performance from you. And the only reason I've given it to him, as opposed to people like Cahill, Zahara and Ayew, is just purely based on the saves he made in the game. Because of course, going into half time at 0-0, he was basically the main guy for that in terms of making the saves. But that one stunning save in particular from Matt Doherty really impressed me. And you've just obviously, I weren't sitting in a home still. But you've got to just hear people who was actually sitting there and go, looking at that save from behind the goal, just showed, how good it was. So once again, Gaeta here winning this week's Man of the Match award. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my Man of the Match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Joe Ward and Cheku Kiarte following the game.
Oh, that must feel like a real kick in the teeth at the end.
Yeah, it's a bit of one to swallow that, especially to concede so late on, and the type of goal we conceded as well, which is not ideal.
Talk us through your goal first of all early in the game. Took a massive deflection. I hate to be the bearer of even worse news, but I think they've taken it off you.
Sums it up, doesn't it? But it is what it is. Dust ourselves down and go again.
What was your take on their equaliser? Because it looks like you've gone to header it. Did you slip a little bit? It's just gone over you a little bit.
I think it was just one of those misjudgments. Skimmed off the top of my head, and like I said, it's a bit of one to swallow. But we dust ourselves down, go again next week, and we've got another home game to put it right, and carry on the momentum from what at times was a strong performance, especially in the second half.
Mentally in the second half, once you're 1 up and they're down to 10 men, is it hard to keep concentrating and not think that the game's in the bag?
Well, I think it's never nice to concede late on, and I think we've got to learn from that. There's a couple of scenarios where we should have probably done a little bit better, especially late on in that game, and just put it to bed. With the ball down the line, just put it into the corner or whatever it may be. But we'll digest it, go again, and get ourselves ready for Norwich.
Cheku, I'm guessing pretty frustrated after that at the end.
Yeah, today we are very disappointed. Yeah, because we work hard. Yeah, we dominate the second half. Maybe we win this game 2-3-0. But if the end we take one goal, it's very hard for use. But now, what we can do, just the game is finished. Just focus for the next one.
Yeah, you came out so well in the second half. What were any changes made at half time?
Yeah, we say we need to go take them in the data. We don't let them play the football what they want. Yeah, this is change the game. And yeah, we do very good in the second half. And
what do you feel went wrong at the end in the last couple of minutes?
Yeah, yes. Sometimes you see we can score 2-0 or 3-0. After the goal come nowhere. They cross the ball, and we don't understand nothing. Yeah, but it's very hard today for use.
It's a third game in a row that the opposition have had a player sent off. How do you play differently when you're playing against 10 men?
Yeah, it's easy. It's not difficult, because you see we have the opportunity to score the second goal. Yeah, after we do some mistake. In the Premier League, if you do one mistake, you pay cash.
Yeah, it was very hard. I'm bitterly disappointed. I thought, in particular during the second half, we actually played well. We created some very good opportunities, and possibly you could argue that we should have been further in the lead than the 1-goal lead we had going into the last 5 minutes of extra time. But to get to within a minute and a half of the final whistle and to concede from a cross, when quite frankly in the second half we'd kept them out of our box pretty well. They hadn't been there very often. It's a major disappointment. We almost conceded in the last game as well, so we can't even argue that we weren't warned or we didn't have this sort of deja vu type of situation, because today was definitely a deja vu situation from the Aston Villa game. There the referee gave a free kick and the goal was disallowed, so we got the 3 points. And today, of course, there was no reason for the referee to intervene, because it was obviously a clear goal, and it gave them a point which, after the first half, I would have more than happily said they deserved, but certainly after the second half, I think we deserved the 3.
The first half was pretty quiet. Your keeper makes a great save, but what did you say to them at half time? They looked a distinct change of pace in the second half when they came out.
Yeah, we had to play quicker. We had to play at a higher tempo. Had to move the ball quicker, and you know, our passing was so much better in the second half, and we started to create chances. So overall, I can't be dissatisfied with the actual performance. But in football, it's all about results and points, and every time you get 3 points, whether you've played well and deserved them, whether you've just been unbelievably lucky, it's a great day. And every day you don't take the points, and games where you concede in injury time after really having full control of the game during the whole of the second half, it becomes a defeat. So today I must say that I feel like we've been defeated here.
When you have those chances in the second half, how frustrating that you don't take them time and time again. You must think it's over if we put this one away.
Of course, yeah, of course. But there you are. You know, either you do and you're happy, or you don't and you're unhappy. There's nothing really one can say as a coach or manager about that. You know, the important thing is to work and have the quality of play and the quality of movement and passing to create the chances. But at the end of the day, you're just hoping you've got the players who are going to take advantage of it and score goals.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Joe Ward and Sheku Kouyaté had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Wolves. But make sure to come back next week for a post-match review of the game against Norwich. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.